Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Scrutiny and Overview Committee. I'm Councillor Neil. Members and officers have their names in front of them for ease of reference. I would like to remind everyone that this meeting will be filmed by the Council and broadcast live on the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. If you are seated in the chamber, it is possible that the cameras will capture your image. By your presence, you are deemed to consent to be filmed and for that to be used in the images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave item, first off, as the gentlemen can remove their jackets, as it's such a warm evening. I wanted to get that in because I didn't want to sit there with my jacket on. All right, we'll move to the agenda. The first item I'm deferring for a month, the next meeting. And I'm going to move on to item 2, election of a vice chairman. To elect the vice chairman of the committee for 2018-19 municipal year. Do I have any proposals?
Yes, I would like to propose David Jones.
Thank you. Any others? Any seconder? That proposition, that election's carried. Councillor Jones, would you like to take your seat? Sorry.
Show of hands, please.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, David. I should have asked for a vote. We will now take a vote on that position. All those deem it in favour?
That is unanimous.
That's unanimous. Councillor Jones, would you like to take your seat?
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your confidence and for the electing me as your vice chairman. Councillor Jameson, who we hope will be back next time, we will then take the election of a chairman for the remainder of the municipal year as the first item on the next meeting. The next item on the agenda is declarations. Apologies for absence. Councillor Smith.
Councillor Fox is going to be late, but he will be attending.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fox will be late. Any further apologies? Of Councillor Jameson, of course. Okay, there are no further apologies. We'll move on to declarations. Are there any declarations of interest in the matters before us tonight? There are none, so proceed to minutes. Do I see a proposal for the minutes? Councillor Abbott. Okay, can we have that noted for the last meeting? Yeah. Any further corrections to the minutes? In which case, is it your wish that I sign these minutes as a true and correct record of proceedings? All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried. So then we move on to the first substantive item, which is review of changes to the scheme of delegation.
Chief Executive.
And Chief Executive and thank you. Are you ready?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. The report in front of you is fairly short, and that's partly on a practical level that there wasn't an awful lot of time between the last council meeting and this evening in order to get something on the agenda. As the report points out, and I'm sure you'll recall, that we brought an item to council to reflect the leaving from the council's employment of the head of property and engineering, the fact that that brought about a requirement to change the scheme of delegation. Members will hopefully be familiar with that process. The scheme of delegation has been brought before you on numerous occasions over the years as part of the Constitution. Members expressed some concern at the council meeting, as I recall it, around officer workloads primarily, and I did my best at that time to reassure the council that Mr. Milner, as it happens to be in this occasion, is entirely content to take on the responsibilities within the additional responsibilities within the revised scheme of delegation, and that's obviously come about as a matter of discussion between me and him and the other members of the senior team. So from my perspective, I'm grateful to Ian Milner for doing that, and I hasten to add at no additional cost to the council, because if senior officers didn't accept these delegations, then quite frankly the council wouldn't function very efficiently. This is a very normal part of how councils function. This council and all other councils have schemes of delegation. I know members will be familiar with that. So it is. I don't want to say it's a matter of routine, because I don't want to make it sound like it's trivial, because it's important, and the responsibilities that Ian carries and the rest of us carry are important. But they are a matter of day-to-day business of the council and how officers function on your behalf. So I would hope that, as the report suggests, that you would accept what I've said and note the revision to the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McIntosh. Are there any questions by members on this point? Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. Chief Executive, just as an example, it'd be useful just to set the scene. For example, a car parking issue where, or probably an engineering's more complicated, an engineering issue. And we've obviously got an engineering team, specialist engineers. Although the previous strategic director had a background in engineering, would it be correct that he probably relied on his team, the expertise of his team, and that's similar what Mr. Milner will be doing going forward?
It's absolutely correct, Councillor. As it happened, the previous post holder happened to be a chartered engineer, but he might have had a different background, because obviously he was looking after a range of services, as people do at that level, and you obviously can't be qualified in everything. So you're absolutely right to say that when Ian Milner exercises these discretions, he will rely on the qualified staff, engineering staff within the team, as in that example, as he would on the advice of everyone else. And as I pointed out in my introduction, this is an entirely normal day-to-day element of how the council functions.
Thank you. If I recall rightly, the concern was that Mr. Milner was doing quite a lot of work for both the emerging unitary authorities, was doing his day job here, if we may put it that way, and was now getting the extra work. And I think the concern that council was expressing was that this was a little excessive to put on one officer. We did, I think, discuss this at the pre-meeting, and there was the question of a possible conflict where, for example, the engineering might say one thing and the finance people might say another. I'm assuming that there are mechanisms in place that would resolve this possible conflict.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 points. We're grateful that members recognise that officer workloads are sometimes fairly busy, because they are. But in terms of making a judgment about that, and it is a judgment, Mr. Milner and I have discussed that at some length. He's satisfied that he can fulfil the requirements. We need to remember that although the delegations, and it's a very long document, and it looks quite arduous, in reality, it's often quite a routine matter. So an officer will bring something before you and ask for you to approve it, and you approve it after asking me some logical and sensible questions about why they think that's the right thing to do. So it's, as I say, more of a routine day-to-day matter. These additional delegations will not involve Ian Milner working many more hours a week, because it just doesn't work like that. So it's a responsibility rather than a workload. At the point of conflict, I mean, potentially that could happen in any of us, whether it's a delegated issue or not. If you have a professional from one area saying that X is a good idea and another from saying that Y is a good idea, then somebody has to decide. And if in this case it's Ian Milner, if he for any reason couldn't decide, and I can't imagine he wouldn't, then I'm sure he'd come and see me, and ultimately I would decide. But these things would ordinarily get resolved through discussion and finding a way forward and a degree of compromise. So there's not an issue of conflict as such. I can't think of an example, but if it did occur, then clearly the person with the delegation would hold the responsibility.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mrs Jones. Councillor Mrs Smith.
It's a quick question, really. If we go to Part 4, Rules of Procedure, the exact paragraph is 10.3p, page 4 to 77. We're going to the effort of changing the officer who is able to write off debts up to £10,000. It might be worth changing the paragraph before where it says that it needs cabinet approval, bearing in mind we don't have one.
Chairman, can I just ask Councillor Smith just to point us to where that
Page
reference is?
27. Paragraph 10.3. It's in, if you go past the table which shows where the officers have been changed, just after that we've got Part 4 Rules of Procedure. And it says exact paragraph 10.3p.
We'll amend that with your consent, members.
Very much, and thank you for spotting that. It's normally my job to pick up ones like that, and I have to admit I'd missed that. Any further questions? Okay, in which case we'll move into debate. Councillor Mrs Jones, you indicated.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Members will recall that I expressed concern over this at the last council meeting. I still have concerns. If all this is so simple, why do we have directors? And I am still very worried about the load we are putting on Mr Milner. I know that he's a very dedicated officer, and I know that he has said, yes, I can do it. But the world is full of people who have said, yes, I am able to cope, and have found that they can't. So I would suggest, Mr Chairman, that this committee keeps a watching brief, because the last thing we want to do is to overload Mr Milner and then find that we've in effect got 2 directorships short. I wouldn't wish that on Mr Milner, but there is a limit to what you can put on one person's back. And therefore, I remain full of doubts, worries about the prospect of Mr Milner willingly taking on a load, but not being able to fulfil it, although he's got the best of intentions. And I would like to think that this committee if you like, watches his interests, because we cannot afford to lose another director.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask, it's a point I should have thought of before, but I can appreciate why in the circumstances we wouldn't have considered appointing a full-time or permanent replacement. But if, to give you an example, if this were to happen in teaching, somebody would be acting up for the remainder. And I was in a school that was going to be closed and made into a comprehensive, and rather than appoint a new headmaster, the deputy head was asked to act up. Would it not stop ring and think about this one? Was consideration given to the thought of making a temporary appointment for the remainder of the municipal year, or until the situation with regard to reorganisation resolved itself?
The head of property and engineering was made compulsorily redundant as part of your medium-term financial strategy savings plan. So replacing him wouldn't fulfil that requirement.
Okay, that's so. By saying that the post had been made redundant rather than just left vacant, it precluded any appointment to fulfil that, to make that point. Am I correct? If I remember rightly.
Within your medium-term financial strategy, you have a savings requirement. Part of that savings requirement comes from a rationalisation of senior management that has been approved by council, and so officers have acted to make that post redundant, which is always regrettable, we know, but that's the world that we live in. And so it's not a case of replacing the post, otherwise there would be no saving being produced. So what we instead do is to look at how we can then take the responsibilities of that post that we made redundant and allocate them to the most appropriate person within the management structure. Just to be clear, we're not one director down. We have 3 directors in our structure, and there's 3 people in post. We have reduced the number of senior managers over time, as most organisations in the public service have done, in part of a managed strategy. And that's what served us well. I again say that I appreciate members' comments about concerns for workload, but as the Chief Executive and the Head of Paid Service, it's my responsibility to make sure that no one is overburdened. I'm absolutely satisfied that Mr. Milner can fulfil the requirements of the scheme of delegation without any question whatsoever. And I think that there's a danger that this issue is blown into something that it doesn't warrant, to be honest. And this is a matter of routine. It's a very well established way that we manage the business of the council, and we should be grateful that officers are prepared to take on this level of responsibility.
Are there any further points? Councillor Neil.
There's also HR legislation that prohibits you from putting somebody else into a place you've made redundant within a certain time limit. So there's a legal aspect to this as well. So you can't actually do that. Maybe it might be more comforting to this committee if the Chief Executive was like to give us a report, say in 4, 5, 6 months' time. See how things are going.
So if we formalise this, Councillor Mrs. Jones, would you be happy if we asked a report to come back, say for the, well, we're May, June, July, August, September, October, to the November meeting of Scrutiny? Councillor Hilliard? Okay.
I would prefer it, Mr. Chairman, I would prefer it to be the meeting before, because by the time we get to November, it's getting rather late if there are difficulties. And I do feel that we need to help Mr. Milner as much as possible and to try to make sure that he isn't overburdened. And we obviously owe him a great deal of thanks for being willing to take on these extra responsibilities, which cannot simply be a quick nod, well, that's all right by me. If he's doing his job, then he's got to look into these things. So I would prefer that we looked at it a meeting before has been suggested, so that if there are problems, we've got time to deal with it before the end of the municipal year.
So the meeting after next will be September 11th.
Yeah, 11th September's the scheduled meeting.
Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points on this. I'm wondering what would actually be the content of a report, what we would see. So we obviously, I don't know how periodically we have a staff survey. Now I could understand comments of a staff survey, potentially we could look at those and see if there's a trend change. But as I said, I'm looking at, I'm on the internet, so I don't know what page it is, but it's a service responsibilities of heads of service and strategic director 3. So as well as financial services, democratic services, legal services, he's also got property and estates, emergency planning, parking, engineering and DWP. Now I've in the last year I've heavily relied upon engineering, property and Dorset Waste Partnership to get queries, and although I've always copied in the previous strategic director, the responses I got were from the heads of teams. So in particular head of engineering gave the answers and then just copied in a strategic director for information purposes, and when it got to a stage publicly that a strategic director needed to make a comment, then he did. And I would imagine that would be exactly the same going forward with Mr. Milner, that he would rely on the heads of departments because they've got the expertise, they're doing it day to day on the ground. And we know Dorset Waste Partnership, again, they've got a heavy structure. So I'm content that if Mr. Milner has got the expertise underneath him, yes, he makes a final call, but with the expert's opinion, and that's what we pay them for.
Councillor Smith, did you indicate?
I did, thank you. I was actually going to make a very similar comment to Councillor Hilliard in that I'm not sure what a report would contain, because what are we going to measure it against? And therefore, how useful would that be? I think we have to rely on the fact that actually we as a council have made this position redundant. We as a council still need somebody to do the job, and it's felt that Ian Milner is capable of doing this job. And I'm sure he has the support of the other strategic directors and the heads of services who work with him. And I think we should accept that and allow this to go ahead.
I don't think there's any question of not allowing it to go ahead. I think there are genuine concerns from members that the execution of the matter might be, as time goes on, things might become frayed. Councillor Mrs Jones, just for the record, did you make that as a formal proposal that we bring this back to the September meeting? And Councillor Neal, were you prepared to second? So we have a proposal on the table that this matter be brought back to the, that a report, and I don't think it need be a long report, come back to the September meeting of scrutiny to assess how the matter is working out. Councillor Fox, am I correct? You came in the middle of this item.
My apologies for my lateness. Family got in the way. And yes, I won't be voting on the item.
Thank you very much. Can we have that minuted, please? Thank you. So, Councillor Neal?
I just wanted it to be the report that I was referring to. I was only thinking that the chief executive would know whether or not things are working or whether the pressure becomes too much. I didn't think it would need to be an extensive, but a report from the chief executive himself.
I think that if I were phrasing this, I would say that the proposal is that the committee ask for a short report be brought to the September meeting, considering showing or analysing or discussing how the new arrangements have worked. Is that Councillor Mr. Jones?
Mr. Chairman, could it be preceded with the fact that this is no reflection on the abilities of Mr. Milner, but simply our concern, as was expressed by a number of members at full council, that we thought we were placing an undue burden on one member of staff?
I think the best way of doing that is for that to be noted in the minutes before the actual formal resolution. Okay, is there any further discussion? Then we'll move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those against? 2. That is carried. Thank you very much. And can I just make a general point to the officers? I think the one concern was that whereas in the past scrutiny changes to the Constitution have come to scrutiny before they went to council. This didn't, and I take the point that this would have presented a very difficult procedure if we had waited, because matters would have needed to have been done. But I think there were concerns that wherever it was possible, Scrutiny Committee should be asked to advise on changes to the Constitution.
Chairman, members, if I can just clarify on that point, changes to the Constitution in terms of the scheme of delegation where officers have left and we've needed to update the scheme of delegation are usually fairly quick and need a fairly urgent decision for that, and they have all tended to go directly to council. Those that have come through scrutiny more recently, and I'll use an example, there was the one around the planning decision and delegated process. That was very much a service delivery issue, and therefore scrutiny has rightly had that opportunity to review that. I take the point, but very often changes to the scheme of delegation are required at some urgency, and usually the time for that is direct to council.
Thank you. If things develop as I think many of us would wish, we might want to, looking ahead, if we do have a future, is to say that at some point maybe the chairman of scrutiny should be informed. But that's, as I said, that we will see how that develops. Thank you.
Chairman, with your permission, can I just make a more general point? I acknowledged twice, I understand members' sentiments about making sure that officers have been asked to deal with a reasonable workload. But there is a danger in doing that you create more work. And I think that's what you've just done. Now, it might not be the biggest thing, a report in 2 months' time. But whilst expressing those concerns, from my perspective, rather than leave me as Ian Milner's manager to keep the matters under review and bring it forward to you if I feel that's necessary, instead of that, you've now asked us to prepare a report, and that's just another report amongst everything else. And I think it's probably counterproductive. We'll obviously do what you've asked us to do, but we just ask in future you bear that in mind, because I think there are sometimes in this committee that there are moments when you make decisions that actually are counterproductive to the smooth running of the council of the business, because you put an extra burden on officers which doesn't warrant the effort. The outcome doesn't warrant the effort. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to make that contribution.
Thank you very much, Chief Executive. I would, without wanting this to develop into a discussion, the role of scrutiny is to ask the questions, and this is obviously something the members felt that they would like to ask the questions on. So while I understand your concerns, sometimes I think Scrutiny Committee we'll have to weigh the extra work against whether we think we're doing our job. So I do want that meeting that we have the fullest confidence in Mr. Milner, but the members have taken the decision now. Well, it could of course be that when the report comes in, that it becomes clear that our concerns were groundless. Right, thank you very much. The overview and scrutiny working group disaggregation. Now, I was supposed to be attending this, and had intended to be able to report. Unfortunately, round about 4:30 on Thursday afternoon, I stood up somewhat awkwardly and my back went into one of its spasms, so I wasn't very nice to know on Thursday night, and therefore I couldn't attend. So my apologies for that. Was any member here present at that meeting? Councillor Neil, would you like to give us a report?
I was present and I became chairman because there was only 2 of us there, and I was elected chairman by the rest of the majority of Poole. There were very many Poole councillors and very many Bournemouth councillors, and we had a long discussion. The basis of what we discussed was a strategy of how we were going to move forward, and the way that we decided was that I recommended that we looked to have a risk register so that we could find out where the problems may be coming from, and that was agreed, and they're going to produce a risk register so that we've got something to deal with at the next meeting. There was something in the minutes where the chairman was going to be elected for each committee meeting. So although I was elected chairman for the last one, I might have to just feed back and then hand over to another chairman. I've got my eyes on someone.
Thank you very much, Councillor Neil. Councillor Smith, would you like to add anything?
I was also present at the meeting. My apologies for voting you in as chairman, Fred. I just want to comment that one of the things that became very apparent at that committee was the enormous amount of work that is going on with the disaggregation, and the fact that they're looking at each service really quite in depth. And as such, we as the Scrutiny and Overview committee will not be looking at every section of every service of the disaggregation. We're going to take a selection at the next committee and make sure that we're happy with them on the risk register, because just at the meeting we were looking at, we spent 45 minutes discussing 3 services, so it's very evident that there's an awful lot of work going on there.
I believe there was something like 144 or 148 services to be dealt with. That was my reasoning for bringing in the point about the risk register, because it would have been impossible to deal with everyone. And some of them are quite minor, so it wouldn't make a great deal of difference.
I am aware through the county council side of things, and also through having been on the joint committee, that this is a huge piece of work, and obviously it's got a huge cost to it. And when you consider that when the reverse happened, when the services in Christchurch were transferred from Hampshire to Dorset in 1974, in those days, local government didn't do as much as it does now. The years between 1997 and 2010 saw a massive increase in what local government has to do at county level. And the untangling this and making sure these can go to a new provider is not going to be terribly easy. And I am sure that while what you're doing is you're actually merging two first tier authorities, and you're adding in a chunk of a third first tier authority, which has worked on different lines. And there is no doubt whatsoever that this is going to be a major piece of work, and the ramifications of it will be felt for, I suspect, many years to come. However, we now move on to the next one, which is the overview, the second one of these groups, which is the overview and scrutiny arrangement. Councillor Hilliard? Councillor Smith.
Sorry, I was just wanting to comment again on the disaggregation. I think one of the points that I think we should take is the fact that they are very much concentrating on making sure that services continue rather than actually worrying so much about the financials. It's about making sure the services continue during the swap over period and ensuring that there's as little difficulty for people as possible. And in fact, they're going as far as to identify any individuals they think where there may be a problem. So I think we do need to note the fact that they are looking at making sure those services continue.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we discussed this before in a previous meeting. I understand that this disaggregation solely looks at Dorset. It doesn't look at what we do with East Dorset. And for me, that's still a chunk of work which obviously the officers and we need to deal with. And I'm just wondering how that is to be addressed.
Again, this is, I know that this was one of the points that has been raised and raised persistently, that the costs of disaggregating our partnership with East Dorset at the second tier level have not been fully examined or indeed analysed. And we've been told at one stage, well, there are no costs, and at the other end, well, yes, there will be costs. So in the end, nothing comes for free except the air. And this is going to be a further problem. At some point, somebody will have to sit down, but I quite agree that at the very first meeting, when we discussed the principles on which disaggregation should take place, I was one of those who said that at the end of the day, there is an old lady in a flat somewhere, and this is what we've got to worry about. And I am still concerned because I still hear stories that people are saying, well, will I still have my carer Esmeralda, who's looked after me for so long? And they can't say yes or no. So this is an ongoing problem. Any further points on the disaggregation side? In which case we move on to overview and scrutiny group. Now, the first meeting of this was held here, and we elected as chairman someone other than the preferred candidate, I understand, from the powers that be, Councillor Mark Anderson of Bournemouth, who is going, I hope, to continue in the role rather than just being for the one meeting. The meeting itself dealt with a lot of, again, picked up on the point we were asked to look at the draft constitution, which is that massive document which is before us all tonight. And the first thing that the committee said was that actually, although we had been asked just to look at the yellow highlighted bits, if scrutiny is a committee that asks the questions, we claim the right to look at it all, which again went down with one or two people like a lead balloon. So again, we concentrated on the Constitution, and from memory, the key points that came up were the way in which the Constitution should be framed, and what you have in front of you is a model which we are assured comes from an unnamed unitary constitution with tweaks to put in with this. We agreed that the Scrutiny Committee for the Shadow Authority should continue to be 555 rather than worked on the basis of strict proportionality. I think the overarching theme of our discussions, and any of the others who were there can please contradict me, was that we wanted to see a constitution that would be as open and as responsive and would be as transparent as possible. Now, unfortunately, it seems that we are not allowed to recommend the committee system that the unitaries, it is claimed, have to be on the cabinet system, though I'm personally not sure about that. But in doing so, we wanted to ensure that the things like the council meetings, the standing orders, gave the greatest possible power to the ordinary members and gave them the best opportunity to challenge the executive. So, for example, we were unhappy with limiting the number of questions that one councillor may ask in succession. We were unhappy about the other restrictions on debate, on speeches and so on. We were unhappy about the limitations on questions that may come in from members of the public, and it may be that this group might wish to comment on that as part of our items that we want to send forward to the committee tomorrow. A very interesting meeting. Quite clearly, there were some other awkward squad members on that committee, and not just me, from Poole and Bournemouth, and the chairman is one of those awkward squad members, which argues very well that you're not going to have a scrutiny and overview committee in the new authority that is just going to be the executive's poodle. That would be a really, really bad way of starting the new authority off. And I think that my first impressions of that meeting were very favourable. Councillor Hilliard, you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would agree that it was a good start for scrutiny and oversight. For me, my takeaways were agreement, I believe, that either members or certainly the chairman of the scrutiny committee would have full access to papers early on, cabinet papers early on, which was encouraging. And we also agreed like call-ins to the scrutiny committee, and I think that worked out to be 10% from memory, which is similar to what we do now. So it was 10 members, could be any members voting for that. So again, I thought that was democratic.
Sorry, I am. Right, that's it. Can I ask the officer? The last committee chose Councillor Watts to be one of the members. Now he has now left the committee. That means we have a vacancy.
I did actually ask to go on there. I was overlooked.
Yeah. As I understand it, the rules say that the chairman of the committee, of the Borough Scrutiny Committee, shall appoint from the members of Scrutiny Committee, and so can I say I do not want to presume on this and before. So can I ask anyone who is interested, and Councillor Neils is noted, anybody else who is interested in going on this committee, if they could let the officer and Councillor Jameson, again presuming, or myself know, and we can then come to a decision.
I have actually spoken to Colin about it.
Yeah.
And it's only been Paul and myself who's attended any of the training on these things, so I think it's really good.
Well, that will be a decision for the new chairman.
And I also just remind that we do have a role for substitutes for those that aren't able to attend. So if you're not actually a full member, you could be a substitute.
Right, thank you very much for that. So we now move on to the massive piece of work on the agenda, or the which is I think the supplementary papers, if I can get the thing to work. This is all very well, apart from when you can't get them to do what you want them to do. Thank you. So the first, so we'll do what we usually do, but I'm going to suggest we park the any comments on the Constitution towards the end. So we have, going through the agenda, we have the apologies, which are, again, we won't know anything about that, declaration of minutes. Are there any issues from the minutes of the 16th of April that members would like taking back to the joint committee? No? Okay. So we move on to public issues. I don't know if there are going to be any recommendations from overview and scrutiny panels. Again, that'll come back to it. Programme update. So the first item is really the disaggregation report, which we have already talked about, but it is report 7 in this massive bundle. So if we have a look at that one, which is on, I think, page 20. Which is on page 21. Are there any comments on this disaggregation bundle? It's an ongoing piece of work, exactly. So there are no comments on that, either backwards or going forwards. So item 8 is the next item, and this is the report on the structural change order, and of course the it's not just the structural change order, it is the incredibly long and complicated regulations order, which is a subject of some concern. So we're asked to agree a delegation to officers in consultation. Now, I am not sure what is meant by a delegation to officers in consultation with the chairman and 2 vice chairmen. Ensure that the committee's view are provided to the ministry in the consequential orders as and when provided. Can anybody explain what they mean? But do they mean officials or officers? Because officers are local government officers and civil servants are government officials. So I can't quite understand this. Mr. Jones, can you help clarify?
Chairman, forgive me. I think this is the mechanism to actually report back to the MHCLG on changes to the consequential orders. These are very much development orders, so these are around the finance and the staffing implications. So there's lots of iterations to these. So this is around feeding back the views into those orders to get them in a fit state to be published in the timetable that is set out in the report.
What I'm trying to get at is the wording is agrees a delegation to officers in consultation with the chairman and 2 vice chairmen to go to the ministry. Should it be officials?
No, the officers are local government officers. So there's the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole officers.
The delegation to officers. Which local government officers is the Joint Committee's councillors going to be approaching, because the officers work for the committee, not the committee for the officers. So if there's a delegation, it should be from the officers to the councillors. But if I can understand it, if it means that we have a delegation to go to London with the chairman and vice chairman or whatever and say, this is what we want, or a delegation with officers to make sure that the duties are known. But I just can't get my head around what exactly it means by delegation to officers. It might be I'm being pedantic and picky, but I think not. Councillor Smith.
I might be able to help. To me, it reads slightly differently in that the committee is agreeing to delegate 2 officers in consultation with the chairman and 2 vice chairmen. So it's the act of delegation rather than a delegation.
In which case, it should be agrees to delegate to officers, because a delegation is a number of delegates sent to represent something. So I'm reading this as agrees mind you, this is probably just careless wording, but as wanting to send a number of our councillors to the now I can understand if it reads your way and says, if it said agrees to delegate to officers, but it shouldn't say agrees a delegation to officers or provides a delegation to officers or whatever, but it shouldn't say.
I think it's careless wording.
Yeah. In which case, do I get the fun of pointing that out tomorrow? Okay, seriously, the way it's worded, it is a problem. And I'm sure Mrs. Coulter will be delighted when I bring that to her attention. And agrees to receive an oral update on what is going to be in the order. Going through the clauses of the report, well, we know that the first committee considered the draft order. While it says that the first committee was the draft structural change order was indeed approved by the appropriate committee on statutory instruments. It is a little silent on the other and more crunching order, as we know, which it isn't, which is a subject of our particular concerns. If I can update members slightly on this, the House of Commons, as members will have seen, their committee debated this, and I really am not very happy about the comments of some of the other Dorset MPs, which were, I think, a little bit more aggressive than was really warranted, but that's a personal opinion. The committee sent that back to the House with no objections. I believe that when it was presented to the House formally on Wednesday of last week, it was presented, I understand, to the House on yesterday, and there was an objection, so it will go to a formal vote division tomorrow. The House of Lords, I believe, is going to discuss both orders tomorrow. The House of Lords Committee on Statutory Instruments actually did bring to the attention of the House of Lords the fact that the one with the very long and complicated title was a retrospective order and was seeking to amend primary legislation retrospectively by means of secondary legislation. So whether or not passage through the Lords will be as easy remains to be seen. Are there any comments on the first part of that, the structural change order? Again, what is there is, I think, accurate, but it doesn't quite give the full picture, but that's another story. Any comments on the consequential orders? The one I think we're going to be most concerned about here is the civic functions order. But again, let's have a look at the others. The negative statutory instrument or the negative prayer procedure means that parliamentary progress should be much quicker. Not necessarily, because there still has to be 40 days between laying of the order, which was on the 29th of March, and it coming into law, unless there is an objection, and in which case if there are objections by a specific number of MPs, then we go through the various stages again. So once again, there may be difficulties. The civic functions orders, it said, will be an affirmative order, and we will be looking at that later. The miscellaneous order, odds and sods. Now again, it's the same. Any comments or questions on the rest of this? And they become law on the, technically they become law on the day after Parliament approves them. So if Parliament if they escape through Parliament at the next week, they will become law on the day after they are formally laid. Again, members will be, the comment here is the Shadow Executive Committee will be looking at the orders. And again, there's a proposal, and officers can delegate matters, and the wording there is correct. Any questions on the key staffing issue or other transitional issues? Now, the one that we, so are we happy with paper 8? So paper 8 can go, can read that, there are no comments on that one. The warding arrangements, again, a long and complicated one, but I think this can be summed up quite quickly by saying that in Christchurch, it is likely that to start with, there will be 2 member wards on very nearly on the present county council divisions. So that again, the Boundary Commission will look at that afterwards. There is, I understand, a certain element of some councillors in our neighbouring authority that would like to see the Boundary Commission putting in wards across the border, possibly to prevent the arising of a free Christchurch movement on its existing boundaries. Though again, the Boundary Commission is actually very concerned about natural strategic boundaries, and I've been involved in this twice now, once for the local government review in Christchurch itself in 2001, and once for the county council of 3 years ago now. And in both those cases, the Boundary Commission was quite insistent that natural existing communities should be respected, and that one proposal had been dreamed up that the Burton Grange should be replaced by Burton and Herne, with a big river in between them, and we changed that, having been told that the Boundaries Commission would not be ecstatic about such a obvious. So it is possible, and again, we as individual members will have the right to put our concerns forward, both at this stage, or if we are still members of the new authority or of a successor council, through the mechanism there. But again, any individual or any group can make comments on these. So at the moment, it looks like I don't think there would be any objection in Christchurch to the carrying on of the 5 county council divisions, which are fairly natural and which were done only 2 years ago, so they have pretty good equality of places. So we will be able to, so I think that is, at the moment we are okay for that. Are there any questions or comments on the warding issues? I don't think it would be appropriate for us to comment on any warding issues outside Christchurch. Okay, any comment on that? Okay, so the next one we go to is to the item 11, which is the shadow authority arrangements. Now,
Civic functions at item 10.
oh, civic functions at item 10 is more, which is a
Page 69 there. Page 69.
yeah, I've got it, page 69. The civic functions report. Now, this is something that will matter very much to this borough. It should matter to other boroughs as well, but I think we can all agree with, except with paragraph 1, which is that members confirm that the preservation of the civic and ceremonial rights for each of the respective borough councils. Now, I wonder if we can look at the 3 charter trustees. Now, in fact, we're glad we've got Richard here because he knows about these things. Can I confirm that it is not going to be 3 charter trustees in Mr. A, Miss B and Mrs. C? It will be 3 bodies of charter trustees. If you look at the 4th line of paragraph 1, it says that through the establishment of 3 charter trustees, that is going to be 3 bodies of charter trustees.
It is indeed going to be 3 separate bodies, and we're coming to Christchurch if you want me to explain Christchurch's position in a moment, but there would be 3 separate charter trustees, and the membership, the boundary of those cannot include existing parishes. So in Christchurch, existing parishes of Burton and Herne would therefore be excluded, and in Bournemouth there is the parish of Holdenhurst would therefore also be excluded. So the boundaries are drawn, and they have to be within those existing borough areas, if that makes sense. So they are 3 separate bodies. The members of those charter trustee bodies are the members who serve the wards falling within that boundary of that charter trustee area.
So if they were to look at cross-ward boundaries in the future, there might be the odd complication. If you said wards wholly within.
Apologies, it's wholly or partly or partially within. We are looking at some of the anomalous boundaries that are in the previous report you had in terms of wards. If that is moving it very slightly to maybe address an anomaly where one property is in the wrong area, then the boundary of the charter trustee is likely to exclude that property. Yeah. If a ward crosses the historic boundary of the 2 boroughs, of Bournemouth and Paul is an example, because this doesn't apply to Christchurch, but if it did and it was 50-50, then the member of that ward would be a charter trustee member of both charter trustees.
And the charter trust, if Christchurch does opt for a town council or a variety of councils, what is the position then? Does the, as I understand it, the chairman of the, what we might call either Christchurch Council, Town Council, would become the mayor of Christchurch by virtue of being the chairman of the council. But you're saying that the mayoralty would be safeguarded by the charter trustees. What is the, and this I think is going to be something that will be important that we get clarified. What happens in that case? Does the new town council inherit the charter and the masonry, mayoralty and everything else? Or is it the charter trustees, or is it one of these things where the charter trustees will hold it for about a second before it's passed on?
The establishment of the charter trustees is intended to be a temporary body to take on and have the charter trustee, the charter, if you like, the royal charter, that is bestowed on the borough, the existing boroughs. So it can exist for periods of time, and there are a number of charter trustees that exist nationally. And in Bournemouth and Paul's instance, then it is likely to carry on for some time. In Christchurch's position, if a new town council is established, then the charter trustees will automatically cease to exist. They cannot exist in parallel with a town council environment or parish or town council. So they would automatically, all those rights, responsibilities and assets would transfer to the new town council or parish council, or whatever arrangement is put in place following the community governance review.
Councillor Smith.
That raises a question in my mind. If we were to end up with, for example, 6 parish councils, how would the decision be made who gets it?
You or me? I'll try and see if I'm wrong. Only the mayor of a town council, only the chairman of a town council becomes the town mayor. The other civic heads of, say, Burton and Herne, they remain the chairman of Burton and Herne parish councils. If Highcliffe eventually, after setting up, were to start itself a town, then its mayor would be its chairman would be entitled to call himself to the title mayor. But then they would have to provide their own mayor because they won't have a charter. Christchurch's charter would be transferred to the new town council.
That's not quite the question I asked. I know certainly part of the consultation we're going through is actually looking at having 6 parish councils, therefore without a town council. Therefore, who would have the responsibility for the mayor if we ended up with the 6 parish councils?
I think it's the responsibility of this borough council to set up, if we set up the Christchurch Central, and there would then be, I understand, 5 councils, not 6. Yeah, and if we set up, as is recommended in the, or is the recommendation, a town council for Christchurch and a community council for Muddyford and a village council, neighbourhood council for Highcliffe, the successor to the borough would be the town. And I think there's something in the Local Government Act 1972 about that.
Just to correct you very slightly, it is 5, and you're right in terms of those area styles. But it can, a charter trustee that we're talking about here can actually be transferred over to a parish council as well. But in Christchurch's case, the town council, if it was created, and the consultation starts on Friday, the town council would take on those responsibilities of the charter.
I think that's important that when we're looking at this, that we know where we're going. Are there any comments on this? Because it looks like the way this is set out, it's not, we're not really considered in the in here, because the but at least anyway we know where we're going, and I do hope we consider the we all take care and that we get as much publicity for it, not looking at anybody in particular, but that we get as much publicity as possible about the consultation opening on Friday in the local press, which, as we know, is a wonderful and magnificent institution, particularly the New Milton Advertiser, seeing as we've got the New Milton Advertiser. Oh, and by the way, totally out of order here, but can we congratulate the former Miss Ray on her marriage, which took place, I think, 2 weeks ago? Yeah. And can we note that? Congratulations, and may you have a long and happy marriage. Okay. Any more details on the, and if we don't get good coverage after that much, yep. Any further comments on paper 10? So now we move to the crunchy bit, paper 11, which is absolutely huge and goes on to the 180 something pages. Now, I'm not sure how we go through this, but I would suggest that we look at the various sections. Some of them will not need a lot of discussion because I don't think we're going to get really snarled up in the protocol and the procurement arrangements or anything like that. Or so can we just look at individual bits here? So if we start off with Article 1 of the Constitution, powers and duties, I think that's self-explanatory. Are there any comments on this? Okay. The shadow authority, a lot of this is just legal. Okay. We all become members of the shadow authority on the day after the orders are made, and I'm sure we all await that with great excitement. And the duties of the shadow councillors, the role of the shadow councillors, is set out in item clause 3 on page 85. Are there any comments on that page? Okay. 80, moving to 86, again, representation roles, it's the same things that we've got at the moment. The rights, again, I don't think there's any drastic changes there from what we're used to. And again, the moving on to chairman and vice chairman. Now, this is going to be slightly more interesting. There will not be well, under normal circumstances, there is a chairman of the authority and a leader of the authority, and they would normally be chosen by the full council, just as we choose the full council. Full council chooses its chairman, the mayor, and its leader, or because of our peculiar, our constitution specifies who it shall be, but the power comes from the full council. Now, when they were drafting this, the joint committee, against the wishes of our leader and deputy leader, said that instead of the leader being elected by the full authority, the leader would be elected by the shadow executive, which is, as we know, dominated by Bournemouth, and will elect the chairman and deputy chairman of that authority, effectively a cabinet, who will become leader and deputy leader of the shadow authority. Now, my view here is that this is a bad clause. That if we are going to be councillors, then we should have the right to be councillor, to elect the leader to speak, to act for the authority. But we have a case here where the leader, although being elected to act for the authority, will be elected from a small number of the authority of councillors by a small number of councillors. And to my mind, that is not democracy. That is autocracy, or even oligarchy to get technical. So I wonder if members would like to send a comment to say that we disagree with this clause very strongly. We believe that the leader and deputy leader should be elected, as they will be in the big grown-up authority, by full council, by the full authority. Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. The way I understand it, this constitution is only for the shadow authority anyway. So we can certainly make that point clear. But I think for the purposes of the executive, it's going to, the end result is going to be exactly the same. So Bournemouth are going to elect their shadow executive members. Poole are going to put theirs. We're only going to get 2 votes. So it's going to be carried anyway. So I don't, in the short term, for the sake of the shadow, I don't think there's any point. I think it probably better purpose would be for the proper authority.
The only thing I would say is that at the moment, Bournemouth will not be able to dominate the shadow authority as a whole, because there are 24 councillors from Christchurch, plus 5 county councillors, which gives 29, plus the number of pooled councillors that are existing, and that will quite nicely overweigh the Bournemouth councillors. So,
does that not include parish councils?
No, they don't include parish councillors, I'm afraid. So sneakily, that it seems to me that this is why the joint committee proposed this, that this guarantees Bournemouth hegemony over the. Of course, if there's a revolt in Bournemouth, then things may change. But I think it's worth making the point. Are members happy with that? Yeah. Okay. So we'll take it. We can send that through, Sarah. Yeah. Other offices, same time to time, same thing. Shadow conduct of shadow councillors, code of conduct, we all know that. Scheme of allowances, shadow council support. Be interesting to see what that will actually come up to. Okay.
How does that fit in with the last page 88 where it's...
Well, page 87,
the last page 88 where it's got name shadow councillors of the shadow authority, electoral ward. Are they talking about
the
divisions
present ward,
in this?
The present ward.
The present wards.
Yeah. I'm a little bit puzzled as to why they want this in the constitution anyway. This should surely be in an appendix or something. It shouldn't be in the constitution. It's not. You don't normally put the names and addresses of members in the constitution because it can vary sometimes from week to week. So I would suggest that we.
It's an appendix.
Sorry?
It's only an appendix.
Yeah, Article 2, but it's an appendix to Article 2. It's not stuck in at the back of the Constitution as appendix or the Constitution. It's an appendix to this article. So can we suggest that this shouldn't be in the Constitution? Okay. Rights and responsibilities of members of the public. Again, I don't think there's anything objectionable in page 89, but if anybody wants to raise something. If I were being cynical, that means it can be summed up by saying you've got the rights to do anything which the authority says which the authority permits you to do, but that would be cynical. Functions of the Shadow Authority, if we move on to 91. Again, a lot of this is going to be statutory, so we can't do anything about this, so we just have to accept that. So that's going to be, I'm not sure why they want 2.1 in the first meeting shall be held within 14 days. Because if the first meeting of the Shadow Authority will be to adopt this constitution, by the time this constitution comes into force, the first meeting will have been held. So why is it in there? It's specified. The order says you meet within this time. Why do you need to repeat it in the constitution? Shall we draw that to their attention? Be awkward? Yes? Thank you. Rest of it is fine. Any questions on the role of the chairman? Again, that's a civic role, but again, I'm unsure. Yeah, what civic role is there for the Shadow Authority? Can you elucidate? Because the 3 constituent boroughs will be trundling along doing their representing, and their mayors will be doing their mayoring, and it will only be in that gap between the 1st of April and I think it's the 5th of May. But there again, there will be the charter trustees, who I assume would take on mayoral engagements and so on.
This is purely for the period from now to for the shadow period.
Yes.
Until the new authority is established. So the charter trustees won't exist at that point.
Exactly.
So they won't exist for the period of this constitution. The chairman of the Shadow Authority, in terms of that civic role, is about chairing those meetings, the meetings of the Shadow Authority. There may be, and what this is, we have plagiarised, I'll probably say, other Shadow Authority models in developing this, and clearly some of those authorities may have had opportunities to perhaps buy properties and open up a new building, a branding. They may do things to promote the Shadow Authority or the new authority during the shadow period. So those sorts of functions will be the responsibility of the chairman of the Shadow Authority. It will be about promoting and developing that new authority for Investment Day.
I accept that.
Well, it shouldn't be surely they shouldn't be promoting the Shadow Authority, they should be promoting the new unit. But it says here, promoting the Shadow Authority.
Yeah.
The new authority doesn't exist until the 1st of April 2019, so it is the Shadow Authority, but it is promoting developments and improvements for the new authority to exist. But you are still the Shadow Authority at that point.
Okay, we're happy with that? We move on to overview and scrutiny. If I were being pedantic, I would put in the Shadow Authority will establish arrangements, because the Shadow Authority does not happen until it goes through Parliament. That's on the 1st of June, and then it will meet. And once it becomes into existence, it won't have established scrutiny arrangements because it won't have met. So it can't be has.
Yeah, I would just be slightly pedantic back to you. You referenced earlier on about the 14-day notice, that can't apply until the order is made. In this case, that statement will be true once the Shadow Authority has adopted the Constitution. These will be the position at that time, and therefore anyone reading it effective from that date will be retrospective at that point, and therefore it will have established arrangements for scrutiny arrangements.
But when you enact the Constitution, it won't have established them. It will only establish them in accordance to the Constitution. So the action is establishing the Constitution, and the new authority, by virtue of that Constitution, we can go on all night. Yeah. Would you like to stay there, Richard, instead of wandering backwards and forwards? Okay, any more comments on that?
This is exactly what we discussed at the meeting,
yeah,
so it's all good.
Okay. Shadow Executive Committee, again, the concerns I would have there are the ones that we mentioned earlier, that it should be, that it's not being elected by the full, it shall be elected by the Shadow Executive Committee. I would prefer it if it were elected, but anyway, that we'll have covered that. I think everything else is just normal. Committees that it's looked at there. Any comments on that? Anybody want to bring up the article arrangements for promoting good standards of behaviour? Anything on that? Officers, again, a lot of this is going to be legal and we can't do anything about it. The head of paid service, interim and appointed monitoring officer, chief finance or section 151 officer and so on. Any problems with that? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to get it straight in my mind, so I know there's going to be a recruitment panel for the head of paid services. So in early June, that probably wouldn't be a role, would it? Wouldn't have been appointed by then?
No, but it says the functions of the head of paid service. As I understand it, the head of paid service, until we get to appointing one, and that work is underway on this one, there won't be any duties of the head of paid service because there won't be one. But once the head of paid service is appointed, that's when it starts rolling. Okay. Anything on decision making on page 105? Anything on legal matters? Publication, changing the constitution. I am uneasy about where it says that the Shadow Executive Committee may authorise changes to the constitution. I don't see why. If they want to change the constitution, it should come to the full authority, just like everything else does. This is giving too much power to the executive. Would everybody agree with that? Yeah. Okay, so can we note that down as a concern that it is giving too much power, that amendment to the constitution, if the constitution is adopted by the whole authority, it should only be changed by the whole authority. Okay.
Can we then add also that the leader shouldn't be able to authorise changes? Because
Yeah,
if we're not going to
quite
allow the
right.
executive committee, then certainly the leader on his own should not be allowed
Agreed.
to do it.
Absolutely. I was going to say it should really be only the shadow authority may authorise changes to the constitution. Okay. Responsibility for functions. Now, again, there's not a lot that we could do about this. This is just, a lot of it is just taken from standard procedure. So unless there's any particular concerns, we'll go straight to page 120. And this is the crunchy bit, standing orders or council rules of procedure. Now, access to information procedure rules is, again, it's important, but I don't think there is anything objectionable. And we did actually look at this, I think, on when we had the meeting here, and I don't think there are any the point was brought up that we should have access to the papers as soon as practical. Any further questions on that? So again, we're just skimming through the next bit. 5 clear working days. That actually is, I believe, what we've got at the moment in the borough. We try and publish for 10 days. I think we try and publish earlier, but the minimum is 5 working days.
I can confirm it is 5 clear working days in the Constitution. That is what we work to for all meetings. Occasionally it may be ready earlier and we will publish it, but 5 clear working days is what we use for all council and committee meetings.
So that actually means sometimes you get them, depending on the weekends, quite a bit early, and bank holidays, you will get them before that. But that's what we have at the moment, and that's so. Again, just going through the exclusion of public meetings. Again, there is certain rights which are guaranteed to the public to be in meetings, and I don't think that these in any way contravene those that we've worked to here. Okay. Moving on to the next report of Shadow Authority. I think the next bit, which is becomes really relevant, is Shadow Executive Committee procedure rules, and again, the Shadow Executive Committee, again, what you've got looks very like what you have as a, certainly for Dorset, for the meetings of the Cabinet. You members can attend, and I'm not sure why it says one for all members of the Shadow Executive Committee shall be entitled to attend meetings of the Shadow Executive Committee unless the Shadow Executive Committee determine otherwise. Now, I'm not really sure what the justification for that could be, he said, looking at Richard.
I think it means that members of a Shadow Authority Committee, I would have thought.
But it says the Shadow Executive Committee shall be entitled to attend. In other words, what they're saying is that the Shadow Executive Committee can exclude a member of its committee from attending meetings. And I'm not happy about that. Again, the fault with this, as we said it when the meeting was here, is that it gives a lot of power to the executive.
Chairman, I think Councillor Hilliard is correct, actually. I think that should actually say all members of the Shadow Authority. I think we can clarify that before the joint committee tomorrow.
Okay. Well, they ought to think about what they're writing, because it's one of these things that can, if it sneaks through, cause problems. Okay. Any other concerns there? The quorum's okay. Taking business, I think, is all right. You have a right to. Now, I understand that any member of the public would be entitled to attend a Shadow Executive Committee except for exempt items under the various local government acts, and that should mean that every member of the authority could attend, but when it says other members, I assume that is going to mean other members of the authority on 4.2, just for clarification. Okay. Business is, I think, uncontentious. Voting, again, shall be a show of hands. Motion under procedural 12. We'll have a look at procedural 12 later on. So then we move, I think, to overview and scrutiny procedure rules. again, work programme, agenda, policy development. I think that's all uncontroversial. You can submit a report by the consideration by the Shadow Executive Committee. Again, we aren't used to this type of structure because we don't have a cabinet, but this is normal procedure for authorities, again, at the County Council where there is a cabinet. Okay. Rights Review and Scrutiny Committee have the access to documents. Again, no problem. The call-in is interesting. There are strict, these rules, you should only be used in exceptional circumstances. What they are trying to say is there that you can't call in a decision just because you don't like it. You have to have these grounds to call it in. And therefore, you couldn't say in an authority where there is a strong opposition, they might be tempted to call things in just on the basis of let's annoy the executive. But there are these, and I don't think these are there's any particular objection to those. We've looked at 9.4. We said that the a call-in can, any three or more members of this is 9.4. We are saying that a call-in can be made by 3 members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee or 12 members of the Shadow Authority, provided those members do not consist entirely of members of one political group. And I think that's a sensible restriction. Everybody happy with that? Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with that. I've just got apologies. I've got to leave the meeting now.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and move on. I know there's a lot of stuff to go through, but it is important at this stage anyway. But I don't think there's any problems for the rest of that. Call in an urgency. Again, there has to be a agreement that it is urgent. The council call for action, again, can bring it in. Party whip. And I'm very pleased to say that they've accepted the rule of the Christchurch Borough Council, and those are the word, instead of the very complicated formula that was included in here, they've just gone for a very straightforward, use exactly the words that we've got. Okay, so I think we can be quite proud about that. Anything else on that? Shadow meeting procedure rules. Any comments or concerns over this one? Again, the just to clarify, 15.1, the Shadow Councillors, 2 votes are the county councillors, so we get 2 votes. I'm not sure whether I'm spectacularly happy about 1/4 of the members asking for a recorded vote, but again, that's I don't know whether we're happy with this or we think it's too high, or that the requirement is too high. Are there any comments on that? No? Okay. Election of chairman, minutes of I think most of this is uncontroversial. The next chunk, Appendix 2, we've looked at that, I don't think is a problem. Various appendices. So I think we can just go through that and say that the next crunch, I don't think we really need to do the financial procedure rules, which is on page 171. Code of conduct for shadow councillors, again, this is much like what we are doing. Protocol on the relationship between councillors and officers, again, much the same. And that is the constitution. Everybody happy with that? Right, next one is the medium-term financial plans. Again, any questions on this one? What is very interesting again is that they are, unless I have got it completely and utterly wrong, they are still not looking at there is no model in here that says this is the scenario for a day one harmonisation. But at least we seem to have moved down from now to a 6-year harmonisation progress. And again, the point is that this whole thing was started off on the basis of a 20-year harmonisation process. And the figures are, the council taxes are going to be a lot different in some areas than they would have been under 20 years. And of course, the savings are different. Okay. Any other comment on that? Can we say that we are still concerned that the authority, that the Joint Committee is not seriously looking at a day one harmonisation? Would that be fair to say? Everybody happy with that?
It says when we were at a meeting, all councillors were very anti that because they were saying that their rates would have to go up significantly.
Well, they should have thought about that. Yep. Then we have the outline financial strategy, again very technical. Budget cycle, again very technical. And again, they will actually be looking at the existing councils will be going through the budgetary monitoring process, and then the new one will take over. And then we have these pretty coloured maps, which are the appendices, and then I think, which relate back to the polling districts. I have to say they're very pretty. Any comments on those? And that, thank you very much for that, ladies and Councillor Mrs. Jones. Did you indicate?
No, I wasn't indicated.
Right, well in that case we can then move on back to the main agenda and the work programme. Miss Ellis.
Work programme is a standard item on our agenda, so I just need to update it for the 17th of July's meeting with, the 11th September's meeting with the update to the Constitution report we discussed earlier.
Okay. Now, I will need to discuss this further with Councillor Jameson, but I've had a large number of concerns raised with me by members of the public concerning the various aspects of planning. Now, I know we cannot look at individual planning cases, but there are concerns particularly over enforcement, and following discussion with the chairman, I think we might be wishing to bring something forward to the September meeting on this. We will be meeting, I believe, before that to discuss the various other items relating to the joint committee, and there will be So there may be an opportunity to bring it to the committee's attention beforehand, but again, I'll talk to Councillor Jameson about that, and we'll bring any papers to you as may be needed. Anything else on that? Councillor Mrs. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask the officer concerned when it is that we're going to get the report on the success or otherwise of the system of using ordinary members of staff to answer planning queries? I'm not coming back to us, has it been settled?
At present it hasn't, but I can chase it up for you.
Yes, my recollection is we asked for it at a specific date, and I think that has been exceeded, but I'm sure you will check that up. Any further comments? Anything else on forward programme? Any press releases for Melanie, who's sitting very patient? Is it Melanie, Kerry? Melanie, I got it right. Anything you think we ought to bring to the public's attention?
Not on the 17th.
Okay. Anything else? Councillor Mrs.
Just to remind the press to talk about our consultation on the
The
CGR.
press have gone. But
But
I'm
maybe we ought to do something on that to remind members of the public to contribute.
going to say I think we ought to get that.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah.
Yeah?
That's the plan, yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Councillor Mrs. Jones? And then
In relation to that, Mr. Chairman, I think there was concern amongst members about where these consultation documents would be available. Can I ask if we've done anything to widen the scope of points where members of the public can obtain these documents?
Yeah, please.
Chairman, at council, I advise that we would be supplying hard copies. Clearly, we will encourage online version. It is clearly cheaper for us to do that, and I'm sure as an authority you'd welcome that. But for anybody who can't use or has access to the online, we will provide printed copies. We will be putting them into public spaces, so in libraries and other locations. We will have them here at the civic offices. If we get a request from anybody, we will supply them in the post if we have to. So we will do that. We will be doing publicity through press releases. But at the council meeting, I did invite members to let me know if they had any other locations they wished us to supply copies of the questionnaire and the documentation to, and I've not had any responses from members. There was one, I think, in terms of putting them in post offices. Was that yours, Councillor Jones? Post offices are a little bit difficult because they are business enterprises, and I don't think they're actually going to welcome them. But if anybody has got any, please do let me know.
I did say that I knew the Somerford Arc would take a stack because you've got people there who very definitely aren't computer literate, and I know there's I've been asked for a supply from a residents group at Bure House.
Indeed, apologies, Councillor Jones. We were going to send you some copies because I knew you had made a request for that.
Yeah.
So if any members have a location, I would stress again, though, that this is not about the members pushing a particular solution. This is about community engagement and the community making up their view and informing the council of their views. But more than happy to supply copies. We will be printing them for Friday, so perhaps next Monday we can supply the members with a bundle of the questionnaire papers and the information sheet that we're producing as well.
Any other comments? Councillor Neil.
I was just going to sort of suggest that we make sure the residents' associations, of which there are numerous ones.
They are already on our list, so the residents, the existing parishes, other establishments. We consulted those previously. The business Chamber of Trade have also asked for details. They will include it in their newsletter. So again, we will encourage anybody who wishes to put it in their newsletter. It's great because they can point them to the website and other material.
Can I
Smith.
suggest that rather than supplying members with paper copies, you would supply us with PDF copies, then we need only print what we need, rather than wasting the printing of those that may not be used.
Noted, although we will have a supply because I'm not sure every member will wish to do that, but clearly the PDF version will be available. This survey is available online, so.
Any further questions? Right, formally I will close the meeting and thank you for your contributions, and we will meet in June before the next meeting either of the Shadow Committee or of the Joint Committee. Can I ask that we now